When I'm not living in New York City, I often travel by car to explore new places. One such trip took me to a small town in Delaware called Milford. It's a small, peaceful place, nestled between endless roads and empty countryside. That day, my plan was to continue driving to Rehoboth Beach, about 45 minutes to an hour away. However, I decided to leave in the evening to avoid waking up early the next day. Around 6 p.m., I began the 5-hour drive, weaving through quiet roads and dark countryside. Since I was only staying overnight, I rented a small house for $50 stat I found through a familiar app. The landlord texted to confirm, and while he seemed a little strange at first, I didn't think much of it. He said his dad would leave the keys in a lockbox near the door, and there was one small quirk. There were a bunch of tropical plants in the kitchen that they hadn't gotten rid of in time. I arrived around 11 p.m. Milford was unlike any other place I'd ever been, a small town almost completely engulfed in darkness. The community where the house was located was a gated community, with about 15 to 20 houses. The surroundings were dark and eerily quiet. As I parked in front of the house, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The space was filled with an indescribable, strange feeling. I opened the lockbox and took out the key, feeling as if there were some invisible eyes watching my every move. Entering the house, I was quickly surrounded by a strange scene. As the warning, the kitchen was filled with large and small pots of tropical plants. They looked like uninvited guests, standing silently in the dark, the dense leaves swaying gently as if something was breathing. The small house had a living room and a bedroom, both of which were quite okay. But the feeling of unease did not leave me. The shadows of the trees on the wall, the dim light from a weak bulb in the kitchen created a ghostly scene. I decided to quickly go to bed, telling myself that I would just spend the night here and leave tomorrow morning. But as I set my backpack down on the couch, I heard a small noise from the kitchen, like a leaf gently brushing against a hard surface. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe not. I grabbed my jacket to keep myself warm, but when I turned around, I noticed that the leaves of a tropical plant seemed to have moved. A shiver ran down my spine. The shadows, the dim light, and the heavy atmosphere of the house kept my eyes on the towering potted plants. I began to wonder, why were there so many tropical plants in such a small house, in such a remote place? I've been to many strange places, but none have left me as confused and uneasy as this small house in Milford. The strange feeling began as soon as I walked through the door. The house was nothing like the pictures I'd seen. The master bedroom had no bed frame, just a single double mattress lying bare on the cold wooden floor. The sheets were wrinkled, there were no pillows, and everything seemed to have been left unfinished. In the corner of the room, an old doll from the 50s sat on a shelf, its eyes following my every move. I tried another room, hoping to find something more comfortable. But the second room was even more bizarre. Nutcracker figures were everywhere, tiny wooden statues that looked like sentinels, standing tall in every corner. The light switches in the room didn't work, leaving everything in darkness. I sighed and decided not to sleep in any of the rooms, instead moving to the small sofa in the living room. But even that sofa wasn't ideal. Old, sagging, and in a corner far from an outlet. I plugged in my phone but couldn't use it because I had no signal, which is a common problem with my Sprint service, especially in remote places like this. Hungry, I left the house and found a small diner that was about to close. I bought a slice of pizza and a Snapple, then headed back home. The only comfort I could find was food. But when I walked in, the eerie feeling came back. I decided to put my GoPro on the shelf to record the house. I always take my GoPro with me when I travel, and this time it seemed like the only way to record what I was seeing. Once I had it set up, I checked everything, making sure nothing was messed up before I left it out of sight. An hour later, I took the SD card from the GoPro and plugged it into my laptop. But strangely, there was nothing on the footage. Not a single second of it was recorded. I couldn't explain it, but the emptiness of the video made me even more nervous. After midnight, exhausted from a long day, I decided to lie down on the sofa, turning on the lights to make myself feel safer. But the space around me still felt wrong. After an hour of lying there unable to sleep, I decided to go to the bathroom. The bathroom looked old, with a pale yellow neon light, dimly lit as if it was blinking. The shower had no curtain, and the sink looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. While I was sitting in the bathroom, I suddenly heard a sound from the kitchen, a high-pitched creak, as if someone was dragging a chair across the wooden floor. My heart was pounding. I knew for sure that I was alone in the house, but the sound was so clear that I couldn't think it was an illusion. Quietly, I opened the bathroom door and looked towards the kitchen. The darkness in the house seemed to deepen, enveloping everything. On the wooden floor, the chair that I remembered sitting neatly in front of the dining table was now at an angle, clearly moved. I closed the bathroom door, trying to stay calm. But in the back of my mind, a bigger question kept ringing. Who, or what, was here with me? I'm not the type to panic, but this time was different. It was a night I'll never forget. The story begins when I arrived at this small rented house, located in the countryside. I was tired from the long trip, and all I wanted was a good night's sleep. But the house had an eerie aura to it from the first glance. The lights were dim, the air was stuffy, and the furniture was so old that it made you feel like you were entering a space that had been abandoned for the past decade. The sofa was my only option for sleeping. It was small and uncomfortable, but at least it didn't feel as creepy as the master bedroom. My phone was plugged into a charger outside the bathroom because there were barely any working outlets. There was no signal, and I didn't care. All I wanted was to get through the night peacefully. But as I sat in the bathroom, suddenly, a sound came from the kitchen. It was a small but distinct creak, as if someone were gently dragging a chair across the faux wood floor. My heart sank and I stopped everything, listening. The sound of the chair slowly stopped. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, I heard a rhythmic tapping sound. Someone or something was tapping its fingers on the wooden table. The sound quickened, becoming more impatient and urgent, as if it was waiting for me to do something. I sat still, my heart pounding, a chill running down my spine as each sound echoed in the small space. It took me a long time to calm down. I knew I couldn't hide in the bathroom forever. Whoever or whatever was out there must have known I was there. Okay, I told myself, if something happens, I'll fight. I rushed out of the bathroom, ready to face anything. But there was nothing there. No one, no sign of presence. The kitchen chair was still in its original position, not moved at all. The house was eerily quiet, as if all the previous sounds were just a product of my imagination. I didn't bother to check further. I immediately stuffed all my belongings into my backpack and left in a hurry. My car sped down the dark road, leaving that strange house in the night. When I arrived at the hotel at 3 a.m., I told the front desk what had happened. He just looked at me strangely and let me check in early, even though the room wasn't ready yet. The next day, as the sun rose high in the sky, I tried to make sense of what had happened. But deep down, I knew for sure that I would never return to that house. And to this day, I still don't understand what pulled up a chair and knocked on the wooden table that night. The mysterious guest in a winter London night. I used to work at a small hostel in London, not a luxury, just a place for tired travelers to stop for the night. My job was simple: greet guests, clean rooms, handle complaints, and make sure nothing unusual happened. The nights usually passed slowly. I would sit behind the reception desk, reading old magazines and sipping coffee to keep myself awake. But that night was different. Late November, London was covered in a cold drizzle and a thick fog. The old fireplace in the lobby hummed softly, trying to fight the cold that seeped through the cracks in the doors. The silence was eerily quiet, and I felt lonelier than usual. Just after 10 o'clock, the lobby door creaked open, accompanied by the rusty bell that always bothered me. I looked up from my magazine to see a man standing there. He was an odd sight: average height, greasy, disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, as if he had been sleeping outdoors for several nights. He glanced around, his eyes worried and uncertain, before heading to the reception desk. I felt a strange unease but reminded myself that people who were exhausted or struggling like this were not uncommon here. He quietly paid in cash, took the room key, and muttered a few incomprehensible words before shuffling down the hall. I thought to myself, maybe he'll fall asleep right away and the night will pass peacefully. But about an hour later, as I was clearing the lobby and trying to relax, strange noises began to come from the hallway. First there was a rustling sound, as if furniture was being dragged. Then I heard mumbles, like muffled, indistinct voices. Curiosity and unease urged me to leave the counter to investigate. The hallway was dark and silent as I approached. When I stopped in front of the other guest's door, all the noise stopped abruptly. I pressed my ear to the door, listening, but it was completely silent. Maybe I was imagining things, I reassured myself, but as I turned away, there was a slight click from inside, as if the door had been opened slightly. I turned around, but the door was still closed. With a chill down my spine, I decided not to bother any further and returned to the front desk. But the feeling of unease clung to me all night. The next morning, I waited for the man to check out. However, when I checked the system, I realized something terrifying. No one had rented the room the night before. The room key was still in the drawer, never taken away. I hurriedly checked the room, but it was empty. There was no sign that the room had been used. Everything was in place, but there was a small water stain on the table, like where a warm cup of coffee had been left. To this day, I still can't explain who the visitor was or what really happened that night. Back in the lobby, I tried to calm myself down, sitting down in my usual chair and taking a sip of my still warm coffee. But just as I relaxed a little, the strange sounds returned. This time, they were more distinct and aggressive, as if someone was moving furniture with great force. Then suddenly, a loud bang rang out. The sound of a door slamming violently echoed down the hallway. My heart raced. An invisible fear took over as I stood up again, rushing to see what was going on. As I approached the stranger's room, the door swung open, startling me. And there he was, standing in the darkness of the hallway, eyes wide, breathing heavily, as if he had just fled from something terrifying. Without a word, he pushed past me, rushing into another empty room at the end of the hallway. I stood there in shock for a moment, not knowing what to do. But eventually, anxiety prompted me to follow him. The room was dark when I entered, and the sight before me made me even more confused. The man stood beside the bed, muttering something inaudible. Then he began to act wildly, flipping the mattress off the bed frame, ripping the sheets, and throwing pillows in all directions. I tried to talk to him, asking him to stop, but my words had no effect. He continued to destroy the room, even throwing the lamp and bedside table to the floor with great force. As the feeling of helplessness took over, I realized I needed help. I turned, intending to run to the front desk to get the phone. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Jack, my security friend who often stopped by to chat at night, appeared. He was tall, strong, and always kept his cool, even in the most stressful situations. Relief flooded me when he entered the room without hesitation. Jack approached the stranger, trying to talk to him and calm him down. But instead of calming him down, the man swung his fists wildly, his eyes blazing with inexplicable anger. The struggle began. In the cramped space of the room, they pushed and bumped, causing more furniture to fall. There were gasps, falling objects, and footsteps. I stood there, my heart pounding, panicked and not knowing what to do. Finally, Jack used all his strength to pin the man to the carpeted floor. He was panting, sweating profusely. Then he shouted urgently at me, "Call the police now." I was startled out of my stupor, running quickly to the front desk to call for help. On the other end of the line, the calm voice of the operator was the only support in the chaos. I don't know what made that man act like that, but his presence left an eerie mystery that I will never forget. My hands shook as I picked up the bedside phone. My fingers fumbled with the numbers in the heavy darkness. The beeping sound, each one like a tap to my mind, added to the tension. I tried to stay calm in my head, but my heart was pounding, threatening to burst out of my chest. When the dispatcher's voice came through the line, each word seemed to fade into the distance, drowned out by the pounding of blood in my ears. I need the police right away," I stammered, my voice shaking, almost lost. My eyes never left the bedroom door, where Jack was struggling with the stranger. I didn't know who he was, but the ferocious look in his eyes and the way he struggled made me realize that I was facing a real threat. Jack held the man tight, even as he fought fiercely, rolling on the floor like a cornered animal. I had never seen Jack so resilient, but the fear that he might be hurt made my heart clench. The next few seconds stretched out like an endless nightmare. Time seemed stretched to the point of unreality. I only realized I was holding my breath when I heard the sound of a car alarm blaring in the distance. The sound, beat by beat, tore through the quiet night. The flashing blue and red lights reflected through the window frames, giving a fragile sense of security. Finally, I thought, help had arrived. The door swung open, and 2 police officers entered, looking stern. They approached the stranger cautiously, their voices low but authoritative. Jack let go, leaving the restraint to them, and immediately backed away from me. His breathing was ragged, sweat beaded on his forehead, but he said nothing. The man refused to cooperate. He struggled, screaming nonsense, his body twisting as if trying to escape the officer's strong grip. The police had to use force to handcuff him. The sound of the iron handcuffs clicking into his wrists startled me. I stood still, unable to move. Even when the man was dragged out of the room and his figure disappeared through the door, I still couldn't breathe a sigh of relief. The room suddenly became strangely quiet, but the silence was not comfortable. It was like the calm after a storm, when everything around us had been destroyed. The room now resembled a small battlefield. Broken furniture was scattered on the floor. Torn sheets hung from the bed. The air was thick with tension and chaos. Jack and I were invited into the main hall to answer questions from the police. The light from the fireplace fell on our tired faces, casting long shadows on the walls. The officers carefully recorded our every word, but their constant questioning and appraising eyes exhausted me even more. I tried to recount everything, but my mind was spinning. My words were fragmented and patchy. A few of the guests at the motel, awakened by the noise, also appeared to give statements. They whispered, their eyes curious and worried. A picture slowly began to come together. The stranger was a drug addict with a history of violence. But knowing that didn't make me feel any better. I just felt the anxiety growing inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. Sitting next to Jack in the dim light of the fireplace, I tried to find comfort in his presence. But the cold feeling inside me wouldn't let go. Dawn came slowly, the pale light of the sun filtering through the fog outside, covering everything in a false peace. My shift finally ended. As I walked out of the motel, my body felt weighed down by the weight of the world. Every step on the deserted road made me feel more and more clearly that the security we believe in is nothing more than a fragile illusion. In an instant, everything familiar can become strange and frightening. Even so, I went back to work at the motel. But from that night on, every time I heard the creaking sound of the lobby door, my heart would tighten with nameless fear. Everything had changed forever. My heart leapt with anxiety as I recalled the stranger's desperate eyes. The feeling not only haunted me, but also became an indelible reminder of how easily a normal night could turn into something truly terrifying. Those memories took me back a few years to when I was a secondary school student. It was a history class trip to Belgium, an adventure that all of us eager GCSE students looked forward to. But little did we know that this trip would be etched in our minds in ways we never expected. It all started when our bus pulled up to a rundown motel on the outskirts of a small town. The building looked old, with peeling paint on its brick walls and ivy growing up the sides, as if to hide some secrets inside. "This is the only room for miles," our tour guide, Mr. Thompson, said reassuringly when we expressed our reservations. With no other choice, we reluctantly dragged our suitcases inside. The receptionist handed us old sets of keys, along with a strange warning: "Stay out of the basement." We exchanged puzzled looks but quickly dismissed them. No one wanted to pay attention to such an odd request when we were so eager to explore a strange town. Our room was on the top floor of the attic. To get there, we had to climb a long wooden staircase, each step accompanied by a creaking sound. The dim light from the old lamps cast strange shadows that danced along the walls, adding to the gloomy atmosphere. When we opened the door, a musty smell rushed out, as if the room had been abandoned for years. The old furniture looked like it hadn't been replaced since the 1970s. Rickety wooden chairs, a frayed carpet, and flimsy curtains that couldn't block out the weak light from outside. We quickly chose our beds, but no one seemed eager to explore the rest of the motel. As night fell, the darkness outside seemed to seep into the room, making the space feel even more oppressive. At this moment, a creaking sound came from somewhere below. "Can anyone hear that?" I whispered, a shiver running down my spine. "It's probably just the wind," a friend said, trying to lighten the tension. But the truth was, none of us felt comfortable. As the night wore on, the strange sounds became more frequent: light footsteps, rattling sounds as if someone were unlocking a lock, and sometimes a faint moan from downstairs. We lay in bed, neither of us daring to say a word, but then, in the middle of the night, the door to our room suddenly shook as if someone outside was trying to open it. A friend ran over and locked the door from the inside. "Someone's outside," he shouted, his voice trembling. We held our breaths, staring at the door. The noise stopped, leaving a deadly silence. The next morning, when we told the front desk, they just gave us a knowing look before whispering, "I told you to stay away from the basement." That was just the beginning, though. But the real answer to the motel's mystery will forever remain in the shadows, where the unexplainable always waits to be revealed. The small, dark space made us uneasy, but Dr. Thompson tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we order food and watch a movie. Still, the tension was palpable, as if it were an inseparable part of the place. Every creak of the floor, every slight movement of the curtains, made me shiver. The feeling of being watched clung to me, and I couldn't shake the thought that eyes were watching us from the shadows. "We need someone to get more water," a friend said, then quickly turned to me with a pleading look. "I'll get some water, but where's the bathroom?" I tried to keep my voice calm. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. It was small and dark, with cracked tiles and flickering lights. I hesitated to enter, but my bladder overcame my fear. As I washed my hands, the feeling set in something or someone was lurking. I turned to look at the cracked door, but there was nothing but thick darkness. My heart beat faster as I hurried back to my room, trying to ignore the unease that was swirling around in my gut. "This is weird," I whispered to my classmates, but they just laughed and told me to keep my imagination away. We tried to relax, blaming the strange sounds on the old house. But as the night wore on, the weird things started. Small objects in the room, glasses of water, books moved as if touched. Strange noises echoed through the hallway, like footsteps. A chill drifted through the room, but it wasn't from the windows or the weather outside. "It's just an old house," someone repeated to themselves, as if to reassure themselves. But deep down, we all knew something was wrong. We began to drift off to sleep, each curled up in our little corner of fragile safety. Then, a scream of terror tore through the silence. I jumped up, my heart pounding. The scream echoed through the motel, ringing like an alarm bell. "What? What just happened?" someone said, voice trembling. Without a word, we all rushed out of bed, gathering in the center of the room. "Mr. Thompson tried to reassure us, but his eyes betrayed a panic he couldn't hide. "We should call the police," someone suggested, but the idea was quickly quashed when we realized we were in the middle of nowhere, with no phone signal and no way to explain. It was just an accident, Mr. Thompson said, voice trembling, but none of us believed him. The answer to that scream and the strangeness around us seemed to be trapped forever in the darkness of the motel. The ghosts of memories from that night continue to haunt me to this day, a reminder that not all stories have a clear ending, and that sometimes it's best to leave them where they belong. The small, dark space made us uneasy, but Dr. Thompson tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we order food and watch a movie. Still, the tension was there, as if it were an inseparable part of the place. Every creak of the floor, every slight movement of the curtains, made me shiver. The feeling of being watched was constant, and I couldn't shake the thought that eyes were watching us from the shadows. "We need someone to get more water," a friend said, then quickly turned to me with a pleading look. "I'll get some water, but where's the bathroom?" I tried to keep my voice calm. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. It was small, dark, with cracked tiles and flickering lights. I hesitated to enter, but my bladder overcame my fear. As I washed my hands, the feeling set in something or someone was lurking. I turned to look at the cracked door, but there was nothing but thick darkness. My heart beat faster as I hurried back to the room, trying to ignore the unease that was swirling deep inside me. "This is weird," I whispered to my classmates, but they just laughed and told me to keep my imagination away. We tried to relax, blaming the strange sounds on the old house. But as the night wore on, the weird things started. Small objects in the room, glasses of water, books moved as if someone had touched them. Strange noises echoed through the hallway, like footsteps. A chill drifted through the room, but it wasn't from the windows or the weather outside. "It's just an old house," someone repeated to reassure themselves. But deep down, we all knew something was wrong. We began to drift off to sleep, each curled up in our little corner of fragile safety. Then, a scream of terror tore through the silence. I jumped up, my heart racing. The scream echoed through the motel, lingering like a warning bell. "What? What just happened?" someone exclaimed, voice trembling. Without a word, we all rushed out of bed and gathered in the center of the room. Mr. Thompson tried to reassure us, but his eyes revealed a panic he could not hide. "We should call the police," someone suggested, but the idea was quickly quashed when we realized we were in the middle of nowhere, without a phone signal, and with no way to explain what had happened. It was just an accident, Mr. Thompson said, voice trembling, but none of us believed him. The explanation for the terrifying scream and the strange things around us seemed to be locked forever in the darkness of the motel. The ghosts of memories from that night continue to haunt me to this day, a reminder that not every story has a clear ending, and sometimes it's best to leave them where they belong. The scream not only echoed in the inn, but also engraved itself in our minds, becoming an indelible haunting. Even though the daylight had risen, bringing warmth and fragile safety, we still could not shake off the feeling of unease lurking in our hearts. We packed our things in a hurry, each movement trembling as if afraid that any delay could provoke something terrifying. "Doctor," Thompson tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled as he folded his coat, and his eyes kept glancing at the door as if afraid it would open at any moment. While everyone was busy packing, I decided to go check the room one last time. Not because I wanted to, but because an indescribable feeling pulled me back, as if there was something left here, waiting for me to discover. As I walked through the long, dark hallway, I noticed that it was too quiet. There was no sound of wind whistling through the cracks of the door, no sound of lone footsteps. Everything was eerily silent, as if the whole house had held its breath to watch my every move. I stopped at the bathroom door. The light from the flickering bulb from yesterday had gone out, leaving a cold darkness covering the space. The creepy feeling returned, like an invisible hand gently touching my shoulder. I swallowed, trying to muster up the courage to open the door. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room, but on the surface of the mirror there was something, a faint trace, like a fingerprint or a breath, spread across the glass. I leaned closer, and my heart stopped when I realized it was writing, scrawled words, as if written in haste. "Don't come back." I backed away, a feeling of dread rising in me. Who had written on the mirror? And why? I wanted to shout for everyone, but my throat felt tight. Not wanting to stay another second, I rushed out of the room and back to the group. On the bus, no one spoke to each other. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts, staring out the window. I tried to convince myself that what I saw was just a figment of my imagination, but the more I tried to push it away, the clearer the image of the words on the mirror became in my mind. We left the motel and continued our journey as planned. New cities, interesting sights, smiles, and laughter seemed to help soothe the memory of that terrible night. But as the night fell, the memories returned, dragging me into a never-ending nightmare. A few weeks after returning home, I decided to learn more about the motel. Through old websites and articles, I discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. The motel had been the site of a series of strange disappearances. The tourists, mostly those of us who had wandered off the beaten path, had disappeared without a trace. The police investigated but found no clear evidence and eventually closed the case in mystery. The stories of the survivors were not much help either. They only told of strange phenomena, noises in the night, the feeling of being watched, and recurring dreams of a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. When I read the last line of a newspaper article, my heart sank. One victim had left a note before disappearing. "Don't come back." Now, I can't help but wonder, was what we experienced that day a warning, or just the beginning of something bigger? I followed the warning on the mirror. I never went back. But the darkness of the motel, and what it contained, was always there, a part of my memory that I couldn't escape. Every night when the darkness falls, I feel like there are eyes watching me from afar. And sometimes, when I stand in front of the mirror, I wonder if there is another message waiting for me, hidden in the thick darkness.